Hey folks, I have a Strat neck here, and it's a American Highway One neck. And the problem with it is that the truss rod nut is almost completely stripped. I managed to break it free with a lot of work. I hammered a 1/8 inch Allen wrench in there and got it to finally break free. But it's still stripped, and I don't want to leave it like that. So the question is, how do you get this truss rod nut out and replace it? This is an interesting design, but basically because they wanted to use a truss rod that does a dual action, they made it so that the nut is completely plugged in there and it's unable to be removed without removing this walnut plug first. You know, a normal truss rod, when you tighten it, it introduces a back bow into the neck. It's very difficult to find a way to introduce an up bow, but Fender did it by placing a plug behind the truss rod nut so that the nut could push against wood on the opposite direction of its travel, and that introduces the up bow. But you know what you have to do to get this out, and let me show you real quick. This is an example of what that plug looks like. This is a Fender part that you can order, and it's a replacement walnut dowel that goes inside this hole. So in order to get this out, I've read a lot of common strategies on it, and I'm going to try a combination of heat and pressure. Like I said, I was able to free up the nut, so hopefully that nut can provide enough back pressure to force it out, but I have to heat it up first. Before I do that, I'm going to score the finish around the plug so that it comes out easy. To score this isn't that easy. It's a poly finish on a Highway 1 neck anyway. I managed to get a nice scored line all the way around. In order to do that, I actually had to kind of poke into the seam with an X-Acto knife and then almost trace around my indentations with the X-Acto knife to break through the finish. Okay, so I've read that steam does a lot to help these removals, so the first thing I'm going to do is put a little water into the hole. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. I just want to make sure that that wood's wet. I've seen a lot of methods on this, but most of them involve putting something in the hole that's roughly the same size as the hole and then heating it up. I've got a number 9 drill bit that I'm going to insert into this hole as it fits pretty tight. And I'm going to heat that with a soldering iron until it gets to roughly 200 degrees, and I'm going to try to keep it there. And I've got a meat thermometer that I'm going to use to measure the temperature of the plug or of the drill bit near the plug. Okay, well I'm at 200 on the drill bit, and the fretboard is noticeably warm to the touch, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to pull the drill bit out, and then I've got to move quickly. I've got an 1/8 inch Allen wrench with some valve grinding compound on the end just to make sure that I don't slip. So my camera decided to quit at the most inopportune time, but I actually have managed to get this plug moving out. I'm just loosening the truss rod nut, which is actually tightening it against the plug, and the plug is moving out tiny bit by tiny bit. And so far, with the valve grinding compound on the end of the Allen wrench, and the fact that this is actually not much tension at all, it's moving it out pretty steadily. One thing I'll note is it got pretty tight right when I got up against the end of the plug initially, and I just kind of kept tightening it until it finally just went pop, and then it started moving. It didn't pop like any, noticeably bit farther out of the hole. It just made the sound. Okay, now here is the point where I think I've run out of threads, and I'm going to use the dowel or the drill bit to keep the dowel from collapsing and try to pull this out with a pair of pliers. Got it. Cool. That's come out fairly clean. I'm happy with that job. So now, gotta get that nut out. This is a magnet that I use for picking up screws, and it's pulling that nut out just fine. Cool. So the plug is out, the old nut is out, and you can see it. Well, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's quite chewed up on the inside, and that's just a function of there being some stuff in the hole that was preventing the truss rod wrench from going all the way into the nut. So I've got a brand new nut. This is a Fender part, as are the dowels that come in a 2-pack. And if I had been a little bit more careful taking this out, I might have been able to save it and reuse it, because it looks like that would be possible. But instead, I'm left with this, installing this new one. Now these go in grooved side first, and I went ahead and made a line around mine right where the old one would have met with the face of the fingerboard here at the top, so that when I install this, I just push it into the line and then I'm done. Okay, so I unboxed unpackaged the nut, and I put just a little bit of grease on it. I used silicone, like dielectric grease that you use for battery terminals, but I don't know exactly what the proper grease is, but I know that stuff doesn't really ever harden. So I used a little bit of that just on the inside of the threads, and not too much, because I didn't want it to come out and get into the part where the wrench actually engages inside the other end of the nut. So I slid that in, tightened it up, and now it's tightened to the point where it's just, I can tell, making contact with the wood in the neck. I did see another video on this recently where someone recommended putting just a little bit of tension on it in order to create a little bit of a back bow in the neck before you push in the dowel. And I would assume that's if you don't really know or have any sort of history of where that dowel should be. Although I do, I have that reference line that I'm going to use. But I went ahead and checked anyway, and if I hold the straight edge down against the 8th and 9th frets, I've got just a little bit of relief here and a little bit down here. And I did actually measure that with a feeler gauge, and I can get probably 5 thousandths or less under each one. If I put like a quarter turn in, I can get 6 thousandths, and that's what the recommendation that I actually saw was. But I actually don't think I need to do that. I think that even if I got that plug all the way in right now and seated up against the other side of that nut, at that point the nut is encapsulated on both sides with wood, and I'm totally comfortable with that. So all that's left now is to prepare this hole a little better and push that in. Now I'm going to be using wood glue for this process, and I'm just using regular Titebond. You need to use a wood glue that will come out in the future with heat. And Titebond 1, 2, and 3 are supposed to be susceptible to some heat. Even though it says it's heat resistant on the bottles, it will not stand up to the 200 degrees that I put on this thing to get this dowel out. So that's what you want. You want it to be under normal conditions. You want it to be holding that thing in there tightly and fine. But whenever you heat it up, you want it to soften so you can remove that plug in the future when that nut strips out again. And it probably will, because it's just not a very good design, to be honest. Oh, by the way, also I've seen some videos where they've said that they've had a washer on the back side of the dowel. I don't know when that would come into play, but if you do have a washer on the back side of your dowel, make sure you put that back in. I did not have one, so I'm not worried about it. Alright, let's give this a whirl. I've got this little horsehair brush that I'm going to use. These things are disposable, and they work great for stuff like this. Make sure you get plenty of glue inside those grooves that are on here. Other than that, you really only need to get glue on the sides. You don't need to get glue on the top. I also made a second line just as a reference where the large end of the dowel stopped on my old one. And I'm just going to use that just because I don't want to get glue on my thumb, so I'm only going to glue up to that line. Just put a little bit on here and then we'll start smearing it around. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and get this started. That's got it buried to the point where it's up to that line. I don't know if you can really see the line on the camera, but I've made it to the line that I was working toward, and I could feel once it got to that line, it actually made contact with the nut on the other side. So that's really where it should be. I'm going to give it a couple more whacks just to make sure that I'm seated properly, and we'll call this one ready to set up and dry. Well, this has been drying for a little while now, and I've been playing around with ways to shave this down. And actually, it's not that hard of a wood, and so I've been able to shave it pretty well with just a straight razor blade. So it's going to be tedious, but I think you can see it goes pretty easily. And you know, you just shave it down, and I can keep that arc. I'm going to go off camera for this because I'm right-handed, and trying to angle around and do this is a little bit difficult for me, but I'll show you the finished product. Alright, so here is the finished repair. I shaved down with a razor blade until it's flat, and now you can't even feel the edges. And I ended up having to remove the tape and just kind of be real careful with the razor blade. There's a few scratches here. I may just try to polish those up, like wet sand maybe a little bit, and just polish them up a little. I'm also going to have to try to find a finish that will go over the top of this hole. I've seen some people use some shellac there, and I think that's what I'm going to try. But I happen not to have any brush on shellac right now. I may actually take some of my spray shellac and spray it into a little cup or something and see if that works. Well, this is basically the finished repair. It's still drying, but I did end up using a little bit of shellac. I concentrated all of the finish on just the walnut piece. That's definitely the way to go. I really like shellac for that purpose. It soaks into the wood pretty well because it's just so heavily thinned with alcohol that it really soaks in there. I'll probably end up giving it another coat over some time. I've already given it 3 or 4 coats just as I've been sitting here, and it's been soaking in. That's going to blend in real nice. I'll come in here later with a little bit of polish and just kind of try to get all the little incidental scuffs from the razor blade off and just clean it up. But I mean, that's really good. I'm real happy with that repair for what it cost me. I'm into this thing for way less than 20 bucks, and that's a lot less than a luthier would have charged me to do it. So don't be scared to take on some projects like this yourself occasionally, especially if you have nothing to lose. You know, you can always, as long as you don't irreparably damage your neck trying to get this piece out, you can always have a luthier come in there and save your butt later. So anyway, hope you all enjoy that quick tip. If you like my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to my channel for more quick tips. Thanks a lot.